Continuamos ahora con nuestro segundo panel, que lleva como título Centroamérica, una amenaza para la seguridad hemisférica, que será moderado por el presidente de Bolivia entre los años 2001 y 2002, Jorge Tuto Quiroga, y para el que invitamos también a este escenario a las siguientes personas. Richard Glenn, secretario adjunto de antinarcóticos en el Departamento de Estado de los Estados Unidos. Kevin McAleenan, quien hasta hace poco fue el secretario del Departamento del Homeland Security de Estados Unidos. Jim Milford, anterior administrador adjunto de la DEA en Washington. Richard Kerlikowske, que también fue comisionado para la Aduana Central y Protección Fronteriza del Departamento de Homeland Security de Estados Unidos. Y Larry Holifield, quien fue director regional de la DEA para México, Centroamérica y Colombia. Señores, el escenario es suyo. Bienvenidos.
Gracias. Gracias Dionisio, gracias Ana Lorena, gracias amigos de la Fundación Libertad y Desarrollo. Un saludo a todos los salvadoreños, hondureños, beliceños, nicas, ticos, catrachos y chapines y a todos los que venimos de otros lugares también. Gracias por este evento muy lindo, uno siempre se va de acá lleno de ideas. Pero ahora también nos llevamos algo muy lindo en el corazón. La mejor canción, el mejor himno a la integración que he visto en mi vida, esa integración centroamericana. Intégrense como ellos cantan y nos va a ir bien. Gracias. Muy bien, en este panel, palabras de introducción en castellano, después vamos a pasar al inglés los invitados y yo hablo tejano que se parece al inglés. La integración económica avanza siempre muy lentamente, como lo han visto en el panel anterior. Lamentablemente, la criminalidad se integra muy rápidamente. El narcotráfico, las caravanas, la corrupción, los coyotes, los narcos se integran sin los impedimentos de aranceles o barreras arancelarias o proteccionismo. Y es un tema que golpea duramente a Centroamérica. Entonces vamos a conversar ahora sobre estos temas con todos los invitados que llegan acá de Estados Unidos. Now I switch to Texan. In the point of context, if you turn on CNN or Fox News, most of what you see about Central America is caravans of migrants, cocaine trafficking, narcos, corruption, lavajato, CICIG, and stuff that is not necessarily what you would like to be in the news for Central America. So let's take on some of these issues, and we worked out an order, and we'll start with Commissioner Kerlikowske. You had to deal with customs, border. You've seen the evolution of the need for protection in the borders and how that wall seems to be moving south as time progresses by. So I would like on the first round, when we talk these issues, to give us first on you, Commissioner, and then the rest, your assessment on the current status of the situation of Central America, the challenges that you see, particularly vis-a-vis migration.
I had the opportunity to serve as President Obama and Vice President Biden's drug policy advisor before heading Customs and Border Protection. One of the things that we rejected was the false narrative that was talked about on drugs, that there are producing countries, there are transit countries, and there are consuming countries. I toured treatment centers.
Can you switch microphones? I think that one is... All right.
I toured treatment centers throughout Central America and saw the devastation, economic and human, that the drugs cause. But I also looked at it from a standpoint at Customs and Border Protection as the number one enabling factor of the human and economic toll of these drugs was corruption in government, corruption of law enforcement, and the failure to enforce the rule of law. And I think that's something that has to be predominant in all of the discussion.
Thank you, Gil. Director Milford, I'll turn over to you, and perhaps your assessment on how the drug trade has evolved. I remember what Commissioner Kerlikowske just mentioned. In the old 80s, Andean countries produced, Colombia refined and the US bought. Now the world has changed dramatically, and Central America is at the forefront of being the door to the gateway to the big consuming market. And how have you seen that evolution vis-a-vis the effects it has had in Central America?
Correct, and thank you, sir. And I'm honored to be with such a great group of people in a wonderful city of Guatemala City. I have been here several times before and traveled throughout South America and all over the world as during my time at DEA. Dealt with most of the situations with the Colombian cartels, dealt with a lot of the Asian situations, and have seen good efforts, bad efforts, and some efforts that have gone fixed become unfixed because of some of the lack of follow-through for the leaders of the country. At this point, I think I mentioned, some of you in the group today will remember I was here about 6 months ago and said that Guatemala and the surrounding regions continue to be narco states. And today I come to tell you that that still is the same. Why is that? It's exactly the same because air trafficking and marine trafficking of narcotics remains strong and is increasing. The amount of money laundering throughout this region and the corruption of banks and businesses and systems, civil systems throughout the country is increasing. Why is this? It's mainly because of corrupt politicians, public officials, and businesses throughout not only Guatemala, but surrounding areas in moving the drugs and in their transits from South America to Central America, up into Mexico, and over into the United States, and in some cases, India. In Europe, excuse me. Why have we not been able to fix this? I think it really comes down to the problems with training, the problems of follow-through by leaders of the country, and by actually pressure being put on government officials to do something by citizens themselves. This is a wonderful country. I've met so many people here that are pillars of the community. It would be helpful if all of those individuals were able to really express their concerns and tell the politicians and their new elected officials who have impressed me deeply with their statements to do something about it. So it really comes down to, at this point, looking at the insufficient judicial system. Currently, the laws are not adequate to take care of some of the issues that are coming up. The corruption has entered the judicial system and it has moved forward, and at this point, we have some serious issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Larry, Director Holifield, turn over to you now. Along the same train of thought, and perhaps you could spice it up a bit, saying, or giving us the evaluation of how helpful was CICIG on fighting corruption and fighting crime when you had it in Guatemala, and then later you can amplify on what it means going ahead, the fact that you don't have it anymore.
Yes, sir. I'll be happy to answer that question about the CICIG, but first let me just say, I guess I'm in a unique position, having served 5 years here in Guatemala as a young agent for DEA, and I also had the privilege of working in Bogota in Colombia for 3 years and 4 years in Mexico City. So I have perhaps a unique experience in my perspective. And at the heart of all of this is the will of the governments to actually confront these problems. And the biggest problem is not just political will, it's also the will of the people. In Colombia, when I was there, they were faced with basically a civil war and a war against major drug cartels. So they had their hands full. When they asked for help from the United States government, the help came. Plan Colombia was developed. We worked side by side with the Colombian National Police and the politicians there. And they had the unique will to just stand up and say no. Why? Because they were threatened. Their whole country was threatened, and they were being bombarded on every front possible. In Mexico, the problem was a little more unique. After 70 some odd years of control by the PRI government, the drug traffickers had plenty of time to creep in with their corruption. And so what they basically did was infiltrated every form of politics in Mexico. And they had a unique way of dealing with those who would not cooperate. You either cooperate or die. We will kill you, we'll kill your family. So they had that thing working for them too. What happened here in Central America was more akin to what happened in Mexico. However, their threat of corruption came from two sides. It not only came from the Colombian drug traffickers, probably some of the smartest and more capable criminals in the world, but it also came from the Mexicans. So they got bombarded from both sides. And actually, the weak economies in Central America worked to the advantage of the drug traffickers. So little by little, they came in, corrupted mayors, corrupted governors, corrupted anyone that got in their way, but in a more subtle way than, say, what was happening in Colombia. Colombia, everybody in the world knew that was a war. That was a war against civil war, and it was also a real war against drug traffickers who were blowing up government buildings and everything like that. So, in answer to your question, one of the frustrations I know that DEA faces today is, and it's a U.S. government, the whole U.S. government, I can say this, we spend a lot of money from the U.S. government trying to help our neighbors in Mexico, in Central America, in Colombia. In Colombia, that money is well spent, and you can see just from 10 years ago how safe it is to travel in Medellin, Cali, or different places in Colombia. Why? Because the people had enough and they really confronted the situation. In Mexico, we were making great advances once the pre-government left. The pre-government really didn't want our help. I can say that. But I can also say that when President Fox came into power, and those who followed him who were not from the pre, the cooperation with the U.S. government in Mexico was at an all-time high. And we used to brag in the embassy every week in our weekly meetings how cooperation had changed. And so we funneled more and more money into Mexico because we had their will, the political will to confront these horrible problems of corruption and drug trafficking. Central America, we're very frustrated, I can tell you that. We've built institution after institution, sunk millions and millions of dollars into the national police, into the judicial system, into every facet of law enforcement in all the countries in Central America. Every time we get close to maybe making a difference, some politician comes along and changes everything. We spend so much money training, developing relationships, working side by side with our counterparts, only to see that when we're getting close, or maybe some politicians feeling threatened, they just, one day our friends are there, the next day we're dealing with somebody entirely different in very important posts. National police, Guardia Hacienda, whatever it is, in whatever country we're talking about, that inconsistency, that money that we spent training, that money we spent, and the time and the effort and the building relationships went completely out the window with the stroke of a pen when some politician came in and changed it all, and we had to start all over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Larry. It's a very fortuitous coincidence that we have the author and the ambassador, the president and ambassador of Plan Colombia, the plan that transformed Colombia, Pastrana and Luis Alberto Moreno here, and President Calderón, who took on the fight against narcotics in Mexico. Richard, over to you. You're the man in charge of this matter at the State Department. You'll soon come south, as we understand, down our way. I'd like to hear your comments vis-a-vis the combined challenges of cocaine, corruption, migration, the whole cauldron of these issues, and the perspective of how you've seen this evolve in the entire region.
First of all, thank you. And Dionisio, thank you for the invitation for us to be able to be here. Excuse me. From the view of the State Department and the U.S. government, we really have three principal goals in the Western Hemisphere. And at first, as I talk about them, they're going to sound like they're very self-interested and very focused on what is important to the United States. Afterwards, I'd like to explain why I think they are crucial and important to all of us. And they aren't necessarily in order, but number one, to impede the production and transit of narcotics through the Western Hemisphere. We in the United States have the great misfortune of being the world's leading consumer of drugs. Normally, and I say this with great pride, the United States likes to be the best in everything. We like to get the most gold medals at the Olympics. We like to be the world champions in basketball. We will never be the world champions in football. But it does bring some measure of shame to the United States to know that we are the number one consumer of drugs. We lost more than 70,000 people to drug overdoses in 2017. Last year that number fortunately went down a little bit, but it is still way too high. So we recognize that there is a responsibility on our end. We are the leading consumers. But there is also a responsibility of our neighbors to take on this challenge as well. As was already spoken about, the influence of drugs in our neighboring countries is becoming more and more of a problem. Consumption within countries that never had a consumption problem. I recently spoke with our friends in Costa Rica. Consumption in Costa Rica, of all places, is skyrocketing. A very big concern. Our number two goal is to impede or discourage the flow of illegal migration towards the United States. That flow of migration impedes the progress of Central America. What you are giving us are some of your best. People who are motivated. People who, in many cases, are well educated. People who have a desire to make their lives better. And instead of taking that energy and focusing it in on their own country, their next best option is to march a couple thousand miles through dangerous territory to try to get to the United States to have a better opportunity. That's not right. It's not right because it's illegal to be there in the United States without proper authorization, but it's not right that people feel a lack of opportunity and that they feel hopelessness in their home countries. That has to change, and we're focused on that, not only from putting obstacles in the way of migration, but improving or helping to improve national criminal justice systems, police, prosecutors, courts, and to improve the security situation so that prosperity can reign. Another goal that we have is to fight the transnational organized crime that facilitates the movement of drugs, the movement of people, and the movement of other goods that undermines the economic prosperity of the region. We do that with billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars, and we take it very seriously. What we have found, as just was said, is that political will is key. Without the political will of the countries in which we are providing assistance, those dollars go wasted. But where there is political will, and the best example that we see is in Colombia, where there is not only the political will, but the will of society, and perhaps most importantly, the will of the economic elite, we can make a difference. But without that political will, nothing changes.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Turn over to Secretary McAleenan. I say this with a good deal of respect. We saw you on CNN always traveling this part of the world with very difficult issues in your portfolio that have to do with crime, security. And on the other side, you had to face the biggest political Twitter machine in the history of the world. So not an easy task. What have you learned from that in Central America? What lessons have you derived from your time spent in this part of the world?
Thank you, Mr. President, for hosting this panel, and thank you, Dr. Gutierrez, for this incredible gathering of leaders and this opportunity. I'd like to start with a brief friendly amendment of my colleague. The U.S. women's national team, as a father of a 10-year-old soccer player, and my daughter, is the best in the world, so I just want to point that out. But you've heard quite a bit from this panel about the continued challenges, the intrinsic challenges, and the fact that economic development, which is the purpose and focus of this conference, it's the opportunity for the future of this region, cannot exist without increased security and rule of law and improved governance. And that depends on attacking corruption. And narcotics are at the root of that. Well, what did I learn in the last 18 months with over 10 visits to the region, traveling from the western highlands of Guatemala, Huehuetenango, all the way to the Darien Gap in Panama, meeting with my counterparts, meeting with business leaders, meeting with civil society, and meeting with ordinary citizens, farmers trying to irrigate during a drought. Well, I learned a tremendous amount about the strength of the Central American people, the challenges they're facing, but also their belief and their desire to create a future that works here at home. And as we've heard about the challenges, I want to talk a little bit about what I've seen working well in our partnerships and really try to connect to the dialogue that the presidents had in the first panel about how we could advance an economic community in the region. Well, in the last year, we signed 12 different agreements, and we heard about agreements being signed between leaders and whether they can be made real. In our case, they have been. Information sharing, countering human trafficking, countering smuggling, countering narcotics, building capacity of national police. What was different about these agreements in the last year, and why have they had an impact, a sustained impact in reducing violence in all three countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador? Why have we seen a tremendous drop in migration flows to the U.S. border from this region? Well, I believe there were three factors that were critical. And the first and most important is that the ideas and the political will came from our partners in the region. They came from ministers of public security, ministers of interior, who started meeting together and talked about their shared challenges across borders in the region and what they could do about it. They didn't even invite the U.S. until their third monthly meeting, and then they brought us in and asked us for help. And we came down and we listened in a spirit of trust and respect to what our minister colleagues were trying to accomplish and what they needed. We shared our information on the criminal organizations that are exploiting vulnerable people in the region, and together we were able to then attack the problem. So that regional ownership, that initiative and political will from partners is absolutely essential. But the other two factors that I think were absolutely critical is it wasn't just a piece of paper and a signed agreement. It was actually the funding and resources provided by the Department of State, but even more importantly, instead of just training and advice, instead of just vetting, we actually put our law enforcement professionals on the ground in numbers greater than we've ever done before, working closely with partner units here in Guatemala, in Honduras, in El Salvador, and we really see the dynamic changing as a result. So what can we do going forward? I do see some optimism in this region. I know I need to be realistic, and we have tremendous amount of experience here about results historically. But the political leadership, the 3 new presidents in this region have sustained these partnerships. The ministers and the professionalism of our partners has continued to increase. And I believe that we can continue this with this unique political moment that we have. I've seen increased optimism from the private sector in the region. And I can tell you that having worked closely with the White House, with the individuals on Capitol Hill that are focused on this region, the attention of Washington is more focused on Central America than at any time in my view since the 80s or 90s. And that attention is 3 parts. It's about security, it's about migration, but it's also about the economic development. So I believe that you not only have a neighbor in the United States, but you have a friend, you have a market, and you have a supporter for ideas like Dr. Gutierrez is advancing here. How do we build this economic integration and really advance growth for an entire region? So I'm an optimist, and I'd like to stay engaged in supporting these incredible initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Commissioner Kerlikowske, I'll pose this round of questions in the following way. Nobody here gets invited, but I am sure the Cartel de Sinaloa, Cartel del Golfo, FARC, Cartel de los Soles in Venezuela, they all convene somewhere. They all meet, they all interact, they all integrate in a way. And cocaine is a heck of a business. Unlimited production, no regulation, no state controls, no taxation, free trade agreement worldwide, and it integrates very quickly. How would you see, if you're giving advice to Central America with what Kevin just said, new government in Salvador, new government in Guatemala, new government in Panama, how would they seize this opportunity? And Dionisio mentioned this at the outset, in terms of advising them on how to deal with security in a holistic, regional way.
These organized groups are a network, and you cannot defeat a network without a network. And the network, as Dionisio and others have explained on the economic side, there is also a network that can be developed and improved upon to fight these networks of criminals. And that is the information sharing and the trust and the cooperation amongst law enforcement professionals, professionals who have been clearly approved and reviewed to make sure that they are honest and that they deserve the trust of the community they serve. They can make a huge difference in taking down these networks, not only in arresting them or seizing the illicit drugs, but also going after their finances. And those are the things that I would recommend as you enforce the rule of law, as you fight against corruption and bribery, that the United States would be such a willing partner to continue to improve upon this, to take down these networks, not just for the benefit of reducing consumption in the United States, but to the benefit of the people within these countries where so much harm occurs as a result of drugs and so much economic toll is taken.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Turning over to Director Milford and then Director Holifield. An interesting point was made. Central America is squeezed between the largest production of cocaine in the world coming from the south and the gateway, the gateway to the North American market. And you mentioned and you touched upon the difficulties of coordinating efforts with Mexico and Colombia and the differences that we're seeing. Perhaps you can make some comments about how can Central America work on its efforts to reduce the production coming from the south and coordinating with the neighbors up north, particularly Mexico, to stop the transit.
It really comes back down to team building and having a group of enforcement officers and professionals who are trusted, first of all, by the country, the people who are leaders within the country, from the president down to the chiefs of police and to the police out in the countryside. You develop a unit that is a vetted unit, a unit that it demands honesty and professionalism, and you then put that with the U.S. government's enforcement individuals who can actually pass intelligence to those individuals, and those people can then move forward and pass information and do their job. One of the biggest problems today is that we feel that there is not enough support of the people on the ground to do their job.
Thank you. Same question to you, Director Holifield.
From my perspective, everything starts with the law. The laws have to be changed, and they have to be enforced. For the new presidents in Central America, I encourage you, pass some laws that deal with wiretapping. Work with DEA, work with the other U.S. law enforcement people to form those vetted agreements that Director Milford just spoke about. Let us gather that intelligence, work side by side with these special units under the law, because I remember in Colombia, there was a lot of wiretapping going on that may not have been exactly legal, but was necessary because it was a state of war. The law has to change first. Secondly, I agree 100% about professionalizing the police. You got to put your money where your mouth is. You can't pay a policeman $100 a month and expect them not to take a bribe. In Mexico, we had a true model, and it was a good model, and it can work in any environment. The same thing happened in the United States when I was a young law enforcement officer. The government of the United States decided, we're going to send these young men out of high school to college. They have to sign an agreement they're going to work in law enforcement. We're going to pay them a decent salary, we're going to give them a free education, and they're going to come back with a commitment to enforce the law. You have to have a law. My experience in Central America working with the law was not a good one, not a good one. On one of the first operations I went on here, I had a special little group that I worked with, made up of the Guardia Hacienda and the National Police. We seized about $30,000 in cash. The leader of the group comes to me and he goes, "What do you want us to do with this money? What are you supposed to do under your law?" Well, under the law, we're supposed to give it to a judge, but if we give it to a judge, it's never going to make it back to the government. The judge is just going to spend the money. That type of mentality has to change. Law enforcement officer has to understand and know these are the rules, follow the law, and you have to have some professionalism, a salary that justifies feeding your family.
Thank you. We're a little short on time, so as quickly as we can. Richard, over to you. If there was such a thing as a regional Central America INL, and you were charged with running it towards the future, what would you do?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing for any of us to realize is that unless you put the resources to the problem, it will never be solved. Look, the United States, we do bring some amount of money. When I meet with ministers, presidents, vice presidents, they will frequently say, "Oh, we just don't have enough resource. If we just had enough resource, we would be able to attack this problem, we'd be able to solve this problem. How can you help us?" And we do help, but the United States will never have enough money. No foreign partner, no donor will ever have enough money to buy the economic or the political will to make a difference. That difference has to come from a national consensus that taking on security situations or taking on crime or building the security institutions that are needed to combat crime is worth the investment. Right now, as a hemisphere, the answer to is it worth it is no. And the answer is no, because that is how defense and criminal justice spending is reflected in the budgets of most of the countries in the hemisphere. So there is a decision being made every day not to invest in public security. If you look at the rate in Latin America of the percent of GDP each year spent on public security and criminal justice, it's some of the lowest in the world. And so to go along with what was just said, in English we say, you get what you pay for. If you're not willing to put the resource and the money towards it, you will get what you pay for. We will always be here, willing to help, willing to provide our expertise, to help other countries provide expertise. But unless there is that political will, and the will of really the economic elite to help direct that political will, we will find ourselves in this perpetual cycle. And so that's why I appreciate so much the leadership of Dionisio to motivate the economic elite and the political elite to address this problem. There are tremendous untapped resources in Central America, and one of the most important keys to untap that resource is security. So I would encourage, make the investment in criminal justice systems, make the investment in security, and you begin to untap that economic resource that makes you a tremendous force in the world.
Thank you, Richard. Kevin, quickly to you. Suppose the integration dream comes true and there's a Homeland Security Central America secretary. What would be the first things you tell him on how to run his or her job?
Actually, I'm going to borrow a comment from President Rodriguez yesterday talking about the basics. I mean, sometimes I think we have a tendency to make this challenge so great that you're almost paralyzed to taking individual steps that can incrementally change dynamics. Well, the political leaders in the region, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala have chosen to enter a customs union. Well, that's a very important decision, but it's not real unless you can make it operationally successful on the ground. Right now, it takes longer for a truck to get from a textile factory in El Salvador, outside of San Salvador, to get to Puerto Cortez in Honduras than it takes for that garments, those textiles, to make it from Puerto Cortez to Savannah, Georgia, to be delivered. That's unacceptable. Those kind of logistical changes that we can work on together, that's what I'd start with as a Homeland Security leader in the region. Let's fix these operational implementation challenges and address them one by one as a team, because the ideas are already here. And the symbol of that progress can resonate and continue to generate more.
Thank you.